All right, let's get back to Protagoras. Remember that guy Protagoras? Well, his number one enemy was a guy by the name of Socrates. Actually, they weren't enemies, but Socrates was a philosopher. He's actually considered the first real philosopher. And Protagoras is the one that made that statement, any opinion is as good as any other. Protagoras also said, man is the measure of all things. And what Protagoras was getting at is that there is no truth, and that truth and ethics and all things are simply relative. There's no such thing as an absolute thing that is true all the time. Now, I know many of you in public education have been told exactly that. The truth is relative, you have to respect everybody's opinion, and nobody's wrong. Well, in philosophy, one of the great things is we're allowed to say some people are wrong, because we can simply show that there's a conflict with the way they've put their ideas together. So, for example, Protagoras was wrong. He can't say every opinion is as good as any other and have that opinion not be true. So we look at a group of these philosophers, and these philosophers were called sophists. And the sophists were people who believed that there is no truth, that it's relative. And relativism does in fact exist, and that means that we have to think about whether it exists, one, and two, whether it ought to exist. So we have to make a distinction between what's called descriptive ethics, what people really do, and normative ethics, what people ought to do. So descriptively speaking, yes, indeed, people do a lot of crazy things. Normatively, I don't think many people think everybody should do pretty crazy things. So let's start with what's called religious descriptive relativism. Different religions believe different things are true. That's simply a fact. For example, if you're Jewish, you don't believe that Jesus was God. If you're a Christian, you do believe that Jesus is God. And if you're Jewish, you can say, I respect Christians, but you're not going to say they're right. And if you're a Christian, you can say, I respect Jewish people, but I certainly don't think they're right. And the reason for that is that if you think they are right, well, then be one. And so there's the problem. If I think what you think is right, then I ought to do what you do. So the fact that there are differences doesn't mean that all those different ideas are necessarily good. So we have religious relativism. Different religions believe different things are true, and whatever religion you're a member of, even if it's atheism, for example, atheists really do not think that people who believe in God are right. They think they're wrong. And people who really do believe in God really do think atheists are wrong. So it's an accurate description, but that's different than saying it ought to be that way. And each of us will fight pretty strongly for what we believe in. So that's the problem with relativism. Next part of relativism is called cultural relativism. Different cultures have very different beliefs about what's right and wrong. And yet we all make our decisions based predominantly on what's right in our culture. So, for example, in the past in India, they used to have a thing called bride burning. And the idea was that if you had a problem with your wife with the dowry and various things, it was considered at least okay to kill your wife so you could remarry. Now it was generally stopped by the government, all kinds of problems with it, but it was still an accepted practice for many years, even though horrible. In America, we don't think that would ever be an acceptable practice. In fact, today in India, they don't think it's an acceptable practice. But culturally, at that point, they thought it was. So, descriptively, yes, indeed, people did these horrible things. Normatively, should they? Well, I think they should not have, as I'm sure you think they should not have burned their brides. The last one is called personal relativism. And this one is teenager relativism. It's actually just a game that teenagers play to torture their parents. And it goes like this. Anything I think is good for me, and what's good for you is good for you and your duty, if you don't think that I'm right. So it looks like this. Honey, I'd like you to clean your room. And you say, Mom, I'm not cleaning my room because, man, we know what's good for you is good for you, and what's good for me is good for me, and I don't want to have to live in a clean room if I don't have to. If you want to have a clean room, you clean your room. And then your mother probably said something like this, or your dad, well, then I'll tell you what's good for me. You stay in that stinky room of yours all day. You get no allowance, no car, no nothing. And until you get that damn room clean, you're not even going to get anything. You're going to just live outside in the street. Something along these lines, sort of angry nonsense. And you think to yourself, oh, my God, Mom, that's not fair. Well, at that moment, you demonstrated you weren't really a personal relativist because you said, Mom, you need to respect my ideas about what's right and wrong, just as I need to respect your ideas of what's right and wrong, which means that I don't have to agree with you, but I have to at least understand you. And so what your mother was saying when she said, I'll show you what's right for me is that you go live outside or you never get in the car again, was that you need to tolerate me and I need to tolerate you. And here's the trick. Tolerance is not relativism. Tolerance is an absolute value. And this is one of the essential components of the United States government. Our Declaration of Independence and our Bill of Rights, the first Bill of Rights, says you have to tolerate different points of view. That doesn't mean that every point of view is right. It means that I have to tolerate your stupidity, and you surely have to tolerate my stupidity. So now we're winding up the end of this next 5 minutes, and I'll get back to you with some of the other ethical principles.